right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Part 2 of lecture today, Unit 7.7, Conducting World War II. We will jump right in. All right, so our learning objective. We're going to explain similarities and differences in how governments used a variety of methods to conduct war. All right, so before we get back into World War II, we need to go back just a few days before the official start of the war, when Germany invaded Poland September 1st, 1939. So, August 23rd, 1929, the Treaty of Non Aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, right? Soviet Union, was signed by German Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov. The pact ensured peace between Germany and the USSR, and contained provisions that neither country would help or ally with an enemy of the other. This was the public portion of the agreement, non-aggression part. The other part of the non-aggression pact was called the Secret Protocol. And basically, this outlined the division of Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. It effectively partitioned Poland between the two powers and stipulated the future territorial rearrangements in the Baltic states, which were Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Finland, and Romania. The protocol's provisions allowed for the Soviet Union to claim Eastern Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and Bessarabia in Romania, while Germany was to take control of Western Poland. This division was intended to delineate spheres of influence, ensuring that both powers could expand their territories without conflict with each other. The signing of this pact and secret protocol was a shock to the international community. It was a temporary alliance between two ideologically opposed regimes of Hitler and Stalin. So remember, Hitler, fascist Nazi government, way over here. And then we have the Soviets way over here, right? Communism, everybody's equal. This really paved the way for the outbreak of World War II. With the German invasion of Poland September 1st, 1939. The existence of the secret protocol was denied by the Soviet Union until 1989, when it was finally acknowledged and then condemned. All right, so the invasion of Poland. It was executed from multiple directions, and it enveloped Poland in a kind of pincher movement that sought to quickly overwhelm and incapacitate the Polish defenses. The invasion prompted France and the UK to declare war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939, so 2 days later, marking the official start of World War II. However, the Allied response was initially limited to declarations of war and some economic actions, without any kind of immediate significant military intervention in Poland. The lack of direct support was partly due to how fast Poland collapsed, as well as the logistical challenges of providing assistance. This picture here is Hitler watching German soldiers march into Poland in September of 1939. So about 2 weeks later, September 17th, the Soviet Union capitalizes on that non-aggression pact and invades Poland from the east. So the Polish government was already struggling to hold back Germany from the west. And you can see in the map here on your screen, that's Germany in the gray, Poland's in the yellow, and then the Soviets are moving in from the east. This pretty much ensured the complete encirclement and defeat of Polish forces, and it led to the partition of Poland between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, as they previously agreed upon in the secret protocol. One of the reasons that everything went so quickly was a new tactic called Blitzkrieg, and that translates to lightning war, but it focuses on speed and surprise. It utilizes a combined arms approach that integrates the rapid movement of tanks, mechanized infantry, and close air support to break through enemy defenses and exploit the element of surprise. All right, so one of the reasons that Poland was so caught off guard by the invasion of the USSR was that ideologically, Germany and the USSR were enemies. All right, so Germany under Hitler was a fascist state that held the more specific fascist ideology of Nazism, which combined extreme nationalist and racial ideologies, emphasized Aryan supremacy, anti Semitism, and the idea of a racially pure community. In relation to the USSR, it's important to note that fascists have a strong opposition to socialism and communism, which is why the alliance between the two was somewhat surprising. The USSR under Stalin was communist, but more specifically, we'd call it Stalinist. And Stalinism was a variant of that Marxist Leninist ideology that emphasized the role of the state in enforcing socialism internally and promoting it globally. It stressed the importance of a dictatorship of the proletariat, eventually leading to a classless society. Although in practice it resulted in a highly centralized state, in the 1930s, the Soviet Union, under Stalin's leadership, strongly opposed fascism as a political ideology. Communism and fascism were seen as diametrically opposed, with communism, which advocated for international class struggle and the abolition of capitalism, while fascism promoted extreme nationalism and often embraced capitalism in some form. Hitler's ideology was based on racial purity and nationalism, while Stalin's focused on class struggle and a state-led path to communism. Both sought territorial expansion, but for different reasons. Hitler wanted the racial Lebensraum, or living space, right? They needed more space for their Aryan power. And Stalin wanted to spread socialism and secure defensive buffers. Both were totalitarian governments and used state apparatus to maintain control, but Hitler used racial laws and propaganda, while Stalin used class warfare and purges. Fascism, it has its core tenets of authoritarianism, nationalism, and militarism, was instrumental in shaping the German state's effort to engage in total war. It was a combination of political propaganda, art, media, all to kind of grow and cultivate this intense form of nationalism and to glorify the Aryan race, positioning Germans as superior and destined to rule over others. This ideology justified aggressive expansionism and the subjugation of people that they deemed inferior. The Nazis' propaganda machine was spearheaded by the Ministry of Propaganda under Joseph Goebbels, and it was relentless and permeated every aspect of German life. Films, radio broadcasts, newspapers, rallies. The regime promoted the values of sacrifice, obedience, and loyalty to the Fuhrer, presenting this war as a noble crusade to secure Lebensraum for the German people. The Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls were organizations that indoctrinated the young in these ideologies. Think of this as like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, but with a Nazi education. This basically ensured the next generation was thoroughly committed to the fascist cause. The regime also used art and culture to serve its war aims, commissioning works that celebrated Germanic myths, heroism, and the martial spirit. By controlling the narrative and suppressing dissent through censorship and the Gestapo's terror, the Nazi government was able to mobilize economic, industrial, and human resources for the war effort. This really demonstrated fascism's capacity to dominate and utilize a nation's full potential in pursuit of total war. And in the picture here is a picture of that the girls group, the League of German Girls, on a march. All right, the Schutzstaffel. That was commonly known as the SS. This was a paramilitary organization under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. It was originally established as Hitler's personal bodyguards, but it grew to serve a variety of roles, including overseeing concentration camps, executing internal security, and carrying out the mass murder of Jews and other groups that were deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. The SS was featured heavily in propaganda posters, and you can see kind of here in these pictures, they're connected with Norse mythology. Just one example of how Nazi Germany used art and culture to mobilize its population for war. Heinrich Himmler was the head of the SS, and he believed in reincarnation. Together with Joseph Goebbels, who was that minister of propaganda, they connected the idea of the German race being descended from Norse warriors to their propaganda war efforts to create a feeling of intense German nationalism. I would ask you guys just to take a look at these posters and see what elements of Norse mythology you can kind of see, or Norse symbolism that are present in these four propaganda posters. All right, so after the invasion of Poland, with the help of the Soviet Union, Hitler attacked Denmark, Norway, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. They didn't all happen simultaneously, but we're going to kind of shorten it down so we can focus on key concepts rather than the battles. France surrendered to Germany within a few weeks of the initial invasion. Hitler took aim at Britain then by sending the Luftwaffe, which is just like the Nazi Air Force, to the Battle of Britain in August 1940. These are some German bomber planes in the attack on Britain in 1940. It's the Battle of Britain in 1940. Hitler and Germany launched an aggressive attack against Britain, but ultimately they were unsuccessful. And ultimately, Hitler decided to abandon the idea of capturing Britain by September 1940. So Great Britain was one of the first nations to implement a policy of total war and mobilized all aspects of national life to support the war movement. The War Cabinet was led by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, which streamlined the political command structure, focusing exclusively on war-related issues. Various ministries like the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Munitions were either created or expanded to handle the war demands efficiently. Industries were nationalized, placed under strict government control to prioritize any kind of production for the military. This included converting civilian factories to produce arms and ammunition, vehicles, aircraft, ships. The government also introduced controls on wages, prices, raw materials, all to maximize resources for the war. Widespread rationing of food, clothing, fuel was introduced to ensure that there was adequate supplies for both the military and civilians. Ration books became a common part of life, controlling the amount of food and other essentials that individuals could purchase. This helped prevent shortages and ensure equity in distribution. The government also actively engaged in propaganda to boost morale and encourage participation in the war effort. This included posters, and this became more popular in the last 25 years again, but this "Keep Calm and Carry On" slogan, radio broadcasts of Churchill's speeches and films. There's also the British Broadcasting Company played a critical role in disseminating information and also maintaining public morale. During World War II, the mobilization of women in the United Kingdom represented a significant shift in societal roles and was crucial to the war effort. We generally think of conscription as the mandatory recruiting of men for direct military service, but the National Service Act of 1941 required that all women aged 20 to 30 register for national service. The ATS, or Auxiliary Territorial Service, was the women's branch in the British Army. Women in the ATS served in roles such as clerks, cooks, telephone operators, and ammunition inspectors. Some were also involved in more combat-related roles, like anti-aircraft gun operation towards the end of the war. The WRNS, which was the Women's Royal Navy Service, was the women's branch of the Royal Navy. Members of the WRNS held roles such as radio operators, mechanics, and drivers. They were crucial in supporting the naval operations and intelligence gathering. The WAAF was an auxiliary organization of the Royal Air Force. Women in the WAAF worked as meteorologists, radar operators, and flight controllers. They played a vital role in the planning and execution of air operations. Women also took on roles in munitions factories, just like they did in World War I, and in the Women's Land Army, where they worked in agriculture to boost Britain's food production. Pictured on the right here are land girls in World War II. Many women also joined voluntary organizations like the Women's Voluntary Services, which played a crucial role in civil defense. They helped with evacuating children, managing rationing, and provided support in bomb areas. Sorry, a couple more there. All right, so British colonies also played a crucial role supporting the Allied war effort. They provided vital resources such as rubber from Malaya and oil from the Middle East. These were essential for military operations. Colonies like India, Australia, several African nations also contributed large numbers of troops who fought in various theaters of the war. These colonies also served as strategic bases and staging points for military operations, significantly enhancing the Allies' global reach and logistical capabilities. The British Indian Army became the largest volunteer army in history, with over 2.5 million men enlisted by war's end. They served in campaigns across Europe, Africa, and Asia. India's industrial and agricultural capacities supplied vital war materials such as food, clothing, and ammunition, supporting not just the troops from India, but the Allied forces at large. In June of 1941, Germany violated its non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. So over 3.5 million German and other Axis troops, along with thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft, launched a surprise attack along a front extending from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. This operation was unprecedented in size, involving 3 major army groups targeting key Soviet positions and cities with the ultimate goal of reaching and capturing Moscow. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union was driven by both ideological and strategic objectives. Ideologically, Hitler had long viewed Soviet Bolshevism as a key enemy of Nazi ideology. Remember, that's why we didn't think they'd ally in the first place. And he was motivated by a desire to eradicate what he considered a major threat to his vision for Europe. Strategically, the invasion was intended to secure the vast natural resources of the Soviet Union, including oil fields and agricultural lands, which Germany needed for their long-term economic and military needs. Hitler also believed that the defeat of the Soviet Union would coerce Britain into surrendering, or at least severely weaken its resolve to fight. The invasion directly violated that Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was that non-aggression treaty. And by launching Operation Barbarossa, Hitler not only betrayed Stalin, who was taken by surprise, but also dismantled the strategic buffer that the treaty had created. The invasion opened up the Eastern Front, which would become one of the largest and most brutal theaters of war in human history. The major result of this event was Stalin and the USSR becoming allied with Britain. Along with the other major powers in World War II, the USSR also engaged in total war. The Soviet Union undertook a massive reorganization and expansion of its industrial base. Industries were nationalized, converted for war production. One of the most notable efforts was the evacuation and relocation of entire industries from the western part of the USSR to the Urals and Siberia, which were away from these advancing German armies. This included not just factories, but also workers and their families. By 1943, these relocated industries were producing more than before the war, which significantly contributed to the Soviets' military capabilities. The USSR also used propaganda and exercised strict control over its population, with severe penalties for any signs of dissent or defeatism. They invested heavily in research and development to support its military needs, leading to advancements in weaponry, including the development of the T-34 tank and the Katyusha rocket launcher. The Soviet space program initially benefited from research conducted during these war years. We'll talk more about that in Unit 8, but this is the rocket launcher here on the slide. All right, so for the most part, we focused on Europe in World War II. Japan was working towards expanding its empire in East Asia. Remember the invasion of Manchuria, the conflict with China. And Japan was motivated to expand because of their lack of natural resources. That put a severe economic strain on the nation. Additionally, the U.S. placed an embargo on Japan and closed the Panama Canal to Japanese shipping, along with other economic sanctions, which were responses to Japanese aggression in Asia, particularly the move into French Indochina. Japan signed the Tripartite Act with Germany and Italy in 1940. What brought the United States officially into World War II was the December 7th, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii by Japan. This was a meticulously planned attack, which was supposed to preemptively neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet, thereby preventing American interference in Japan's imperial expansion in Southeast Asia. This assault led to the catastrophic loss of nearly 2,400 American lives, significant naval and aerial destruction, and resulted in the U.S.'s formal entry into World War II the following day, with Congress declaring war on Japan. This is a picture of the USS Arizona burning after the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. So after the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, and the subsequent formal declaration of war against Japan, and then shortly after Germany and Italy, the United States undertook a monumental effort to mobilize for World War II under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The U.S. economy transitioned from a peacetime to a wartime footing. This was a process that was managed by various new government agencies, like the War Production Board and the Office of War Mobilization. These agencies oversaw the conversion of civilian manufacturing capabilities into military production, much like we saw in Britain. For example, automobile factories began producing tanks and aircraft instead of cars. The war also accelerated technological and scientific research, leading to advancements such as radar, the mass production of penicillin, and the development of nuclear weapons, we know it as the Manhattan Project. These efforts not only provided the military with superior technology, but also laid the groundwork for post-war scientific progress. With a significant portion of the male workforce serving the military, there was a massive influx of women into the workforce. This was symbolized by the iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter. The U.S. introduced rationing of certain goods, such as gasoline, rubber, sugar, and butter, to ensure adequate supplies for military use. War bonds and stamps became common means for citizens to contribute financially to the war effort. Propaganda campaigns encouraged conservation of materials and participation in civil defense programs. There's a picture of FDR signing the declaration of war against Japan. When we talk about wartime innovations and technology, we typically think of weapons and machinery. However, World War II ushered in a new era of medical treatment by making antibiotics, penicillin in particular, widely available. Though penicillin was discovered in 1928, its mass production was significantly ramped up by the U.S. and Britain during the war, after recognizing its potential to treat bacterial infections that were previously likely to be fatal, especially in war wounds. By 1944, thanks to the efforts of scientists in the U.S. government's War Production Board, production had scaled up to the point where enough penicillin was available to treat all the Allied forces' needs. This wonder drug dramatically reduced deaths from wounded infections and other complications, and its widespread use marked a turning point in medical history. Post-war, the successful use of penicillin during World War II helped to change civilian health measures, which we'll get into in Unit 9. All right, so we touched briefly on the role of British colonies earlier in this lecture, and while India did have an enormous volunteer army, World War II was also a time of independence movements within the colony. If you remember from our 7.5 lecture, there were unresolved tensions that introduced Gandhi, the Indian National Congress, and nonviolent resistance to British rule in India. However, there was another resistance movement within India that followed distinctly militant paths towards freeing India from British rule. Disenchanted with a nonviolent approach led by Gandhi and the Indian National Congress, Subhas Chandra Bose sought external assistance to challenge British control directly through armed struggle. When World War II broke out, Bose organized a mass protest against Viceroy Lord Lingitle's decision to declare war on India's behalf without consulting the INC. Bose was later imprisoned, then released on house arrest. In 1941, Bose made a dramatic escape from India, traveling to Germany and later to Japan, seeking Axis support to liberate India. By 1943, he was in Southeast Asia, where he took command of the Indian National Army, which was initially formed by Indian prisoners of war captured by the Japanese in the Malayan Campaign and the fall of Singapore. Under Bose's leadership, the INA was revitalized and reorganized to fight against the British alongside Japanese forces. All right, so Bose's vision culminated in the INA's participation in the Japanese offensive into India through Burma, which is now Myanmar, in 1944. He coined the battle cry, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom." This was sought to inspire the Indian masses to rally for the cause of independence. The INA managed to advance into Indian territory and hoisted the Indian flag at Moraine and Manipur, but the campaign eventually faltered as the Japanese forces were pushed back in the broader Allied counteroffensive in Burma. Despite its military setbacks, the INA stirred considerable patriotism and political awareness across India. The subsequent trials of INA officers by the British in the Red Fort trials of 1945 sparked massive public outrage and sympathy for the cause of independence, which significantly weakened British legitimacy and resolve to continue ruling India. On the left there, bottom left, is Bose speaking in Tokyo in 1943. Firebombing. This is a military tactic that involves the targeted use of incendiary bombs to cause widespread fire damage. This is typically in densely populated areas. During World War II, the U.S. used firebombing extensively against Japan, with the most devastating attack occurring in Tokyo on the night of March 9th and 10th, 1945. This raid, known as Operation Meeting House, saw over 300 B 29 bombers drop thousands of tons of incendiary bombs made primarily of napalm and white phosphorus on Tokyo's primarily wooden and paper houses. The resulting inferno created a vast firestorm that obliterated roughly 16 square miles of the city, killed an estimated 100,000 civilians, and displaced over 1 million people, making the single deadliest air raid of the war. This method of aerial warfare aimed to undermine Japanese morale and cripple war production, which contributed significantly to Japan's surrender later that year. On the left here is the B-29 bomber. On the right is Tokyo's business district, which was largely leveled after the firebombing of Operation Meeting House. All right, the development of atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the result of the Manhattan Project. This was a top secret research initiative led by the U.S. with the support of the UK and Canada. It was initiated in 1942 and directed by American physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. The project pooled the talents of some of the world's leading scientists to harness nuclear energy for military use, culminated in the first successful test of a nuclear weapon, July 1945 at Trinity Site, New Mexico. The groundbreaking scientific achievement provided the U.S. with a powerful new weapon and marked the beginning of the atomic age. In this picture here is the mushroom cloud over Nagasaki after one of 2 atomic bombs was used on Japan in World War II. All right, so the end of World War II. Um, During World War II, the U.S. dropped those two atomic bombs, making the first and only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. The first bomb was nicknamed Little Boy and was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and the second, known as Fat Man, on Nagasaki 3 days later on August 9th. The immediate explosions and subsequent radiation exposure resulted in the deaths of approximately 70,000 people in Hiroshima by the end of the day. The total eventually reached 140,000 by the end of the year due to injuries and radiation sickness. In Nagasaki, the initial blast killed about 40,000, with total fatalities rising up to approximately 74,000 by the end of 1945. These bombings not only caused massive destruction and loss of life, but also played a significant role in Japan's unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945. The surrender ceremony in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945, marked the definitive end of hostilities in World War II, leading to the Allied occupation of Japan and the restructuring of international order in the post-war era. All right, so we have to cover World War II so quickly, and we can only focus on a couple key concepts. So if you don't have a strong foundation, these are just the major slides. It's a quick timeline. It still leaves out major parts of the war, like the Africa campaign and island hopping. But within the context of what you guys need to know for this course, these are kind of our major events. And here are your key ideas for review. Sorry, I am battling a cough. I tried to pause it, but if I didn't get it paused in time, I coughed. I apologize. I'm working my way through it. You guys have a wonderful day. I will see you on Friday. Thanks, everybody.